this week?
Just when we got used to C.
You didn't sound very excited about that last week, so.
Oh, we're excited about it this week because it's the topic this week. Okay?
Oh, okay.
On top of that, you're going to actually have an assignment due, student class part 1. If you're in the data structures class, presumably you're doing a student class that stores information about students. So this would parallel that. If you're not in the data structures class, then we're making a class that represents student information. We have 2 parts to this meeting. It can take 2 weeks. So part 1, you're to have a class called student. I want you to realize that when I write something like a class called student, that capitalization and everything spelling is important to me. So when you declare your class, keep it with the correct spelling. Your class you create should have data members. Now from your Python days, you know what a data member is. That would be when you did self.something, right, to store data into an object. We do it differently in C++. We'll see some of that before the day is out. You have a data member that is called mAge. M for member, age because it will represent the age of a student. You should also have data members M last name, M first name, M email, and M SSN. All of them will be private variables. We'll talk about what it means to be private. And their type would be array of characters, or C strings. Okay? So you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 C strings in this class and 1 integer in this class. We're going to provide a constructor and 10 accessor methods. What's an accessor method? Does anybody know?
Function.
Okay. An accessor method is something like getAge, which fetches the age parameter out of an object. SetAge, which modifies the age data member of an object. So by 10, we have 10 because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 data members. You'll need a get and a set for each of those 5. So that's where the 10 accessor methods come in. So an accessor method, in short, gains access to data members within an object. As we'll see, unlike Python, C++ programs are usually constructed such that other code that's used in your class can't just grab the data members if they want. They have to use accessor methods. And we do that by design. Okay? A constructor, you remember the init method of classes in Python, which initializes a new object? Well, the constructor is, we might have called that constructor depending upon your instructor in 14 or 1410. But we call it a constructor in C++. All right, we'll talk about where you store your code, the fact that you actually usually have a header file and an implementation file. And you'll be required to do that for your student class. And finally, you'll provide a main function that exercises your code, which you should always do when you write code, right? Write a test routine to exercise, make sure it works correctly. Okay, so any questions besides, I don't know what it means to be a private data member and things like that? And of course, about the gist of what we're trying to accomplish with this assignment. This is just to force you to actually create your own class. Okay, today we're going to cover our topic by doing an example. In my example, I'm going to create a class that I will call track. The intention of this class is it will represent information about a music track or an audio track within an album. Remember when they used to give vinyl out or sell vinyl? So anyway, a single track on an album. And I'm not going to go too in-depth here, but I am going to create one data member I'll call M length, which is the number of seconds that the track has, how long it is in seconds. And I'm also going to create one called M title. which will tell me what the song's title is. Okay? That's all I'm gonna create in my class. It'll be fairly simple. M length I'm going to actually represent as double precision because we'll allow it to represent fractional parts of a second. And it'll be in seconds but in fractions. And this will be a C string. Okay? Alright, I have no idea what code just popped up. That was from last time, wasn't it? Okay, if you go looking for this later today, it'll be in a directory called track. Okay, the first thing that we're going to look at here is the fact that when you have a class, you need to actually declare the class, which says I'm going to have a class and what data members it's going to have and what methods it's going to have, and then you separately actually implement those methods. So, we did a bigger font last time, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay. Basic structure of a class declaration here. The keyword class, as you can see, it's highlighted there. And the class is defined as a block here, so there's curly braces defining the block. And this is one of the weird exceptions where the block actually ends with a semicolon. It's required to have a semicolon. Most of the cases we've seen curly braces, they haven't had semicolons at the end, right? Okay, in addition to that, we have what we call public and private areas of our class. Public means that external code that doesn't belong to the class, can actually see it. And private means only code that belongs to the class can see it. So in order to make our data members so that they're hidden, not available for external use, we put our data members in a private area. So I said I was going to have one called M length. What type is it? Double? And my other one is called M title. And how are we going to do this? I'm going to change this later, but we'll start off like this. We'll make that big so we have enough room for most, even Inagata DeVito would fit in there, right? So. Okay, now in the public area, I have to declare a constructor. And a accessor method. So how would I write an accessor method for length that fetches the value of length? So it's going to return a double, and it's going to be called get length. So what if I wanted to modify the value of length? I'll call it set length. And I'll pass in a value for length. I'm going to have it return a bool here. And then I want to be able to fetch the title and set the title. Okay, fire away questions about what we've done. I'm just trying to give you an example to open our discussion.
Yeah. Just a second, I'm trying to catch up with you.
Well, okay, so the Boolean is going to be returning either 1 or 0, right?
True or false, yeah. 1 or 0, true or false. Based on whether that's a valid length or a valid title. If I was actually able to set it. So, for example, if they give me a negative length, then I'll probably not set it and return a false. Because you can't have negative time.
Is it correct for C, it would return a 1 or 0, and for C++, that you're allowed to use true or false?
Okay, so in C, we talked about how 0 is false, interpreted as false, right? And anything else, not 0, is true. Well, the same holds in C++. You can still use 0 to mean false and anything else to mean true. But C++ also adds keywords, false and true, lowercase, not uppercase. So you're coming from Python, we're used to the capital T and the capital F. Those are not correct here. It has to be lowercase. Thank you.
And the bool type is built in. We don't have to include anything.
That's correct. Bool is built into C++, part of C++, and it's meant to deal with these. In implementation, it's usually passing an int around, and it's still doing the 0 versus not 0 comparison. But the keywords false and true interpret themselves to be 0 and 1. So you really want to be careful when you're dealing with bools and true and false that you don't say if it is equal to true. Because what you really want to know is if it's considered true. And so a test statement would usually come up like, let's say you had a Boolean variable b, and it had some value set to it. When you want to test it, you would actually say something like if b, then execute some code, meaning if b is considered true, rather than say if b is equal to true. Because that is restricted that b has that particular value of true, as opposed to something other than 0. So this is more correct code, it's safer code. Just little gotchas that I've run into in my life. Okay? Any more questions on that? How would I have written a Python class like this?
Class track, colon.
Oh yes, thank you. Class, track, colon.
Oh, wait, is it? It's getting.
Let's go back here.
It's gonna need to accept variables.
To the constructor, right?
All right.
Something like that.
And then you want to store those.
So, I guess we got that self right.
Okay.
So self.m length, and I'm going to use the same names, right? Length equals length n. And title. What is going on with that? Okay. I'll put a return statement there so my editor knows to indent correctly. Get length. Self return self dot m length. This all making sense? Mm-hmm. Set length self length in self dot if length n is greater than or equal to 0. I'm crossing my worlds. Okay. Then we self dot length m length is equal to length n return true. otherwise will return a false, right?
And those have to be capital.
I've been writing a lot of C++ code recently. Okay, thank you. Okay, and then I would do the same thing for get title set tab, right? And I'm going to leave a comment here, unless somebody wants to see them. Okay, so I just want to use that as a frame of reference, right? Since we're all mostly coming from Python. Okay, so now what we need to do is implement the methods here. Notice that the declaration and the definitions are separate. So I go to a new file, track.cpp. The first thing I have to do is say include track.h. That means now that when the CPP file is compiled, the definition in track.h will be included. I don't have to retype that code here, but it's necessary that we actually have that declaration. Then I can start implementing the functions. We had, I'm not going to retype all that. Those are the names of our functions, right? Now, in order to actually say that this method is a member of the track class, I add the syntax here, class name : in front of the method name to make my implementations. Okay, that's different, right, than what you've been seeing in Python. It's a scoping mechanism just to say that this is a member of track.
Are you going to take screenshots like online?
These code examples should get uploaded. At least the final result that we end up with should get uploaded. Okay, so that's our basic structure to make sure that the compiler knows that these methods are actually methods of a class. Putting that track : in front. Okay, now when we're inside of a method here, all these are methods of the class. There's no self object in the parameter list, right? So instead of being declared explicitly, there is, however, a pointer to the current object named this. This is a pointer to a track object. Just like self was the object we were dealing with in Python, this is a pointer to the current object. So I'll say this mLength equals length in. Now this is not the way we would actually do it though, right, for title, because title is a character string. But I want to do something here so that it gets copied from title, right? So let's first though deal with this thing. Remember pointers. We did structs earlier, right? Briefly in C we did structs. And so with a struct, if I have a struct named S and it has a data member X, I can say S.X, right? To talk about the data member of that struct. Well, the same thing works if I have a class. In fact, classes in C++ and structs in C++ are very, very similar. So if I have an object called O and it has a data member X, I can access it like that, if O is an actual object. On the other hand, if O is a pointer to an object, I can access its data member by using the arrow key. The arrow operator here. This means the data member X that's located somewhere, wherever O pointer points to. We did a little bit with pointers, right? We haven't used the arrow, have we?
A little bit.
We've used the star, right?
Yeah.
to say the thing that O pointer points to. For future reference, this here, star O pointer dot X, is the same as O pointer arrow X. It's just the arrow dereferences and finds the member at the same time. So from our pattern here, we go back to track.py. Over here we said self.m length equals m length, right? So this arrow m length equals m length in is the same line. It has the same effect. Okay, so hopefully we can tie in somehow to our experience, what we're used to doing. Yes?
What does this mean?
This is a magic word. It's a magic keyword. Okay? That's the first thing I'll say. Where did it come from? It's the people who created C++ decided that this was a magic word.
Okay.
Okay? And so I'm inside a method of the track class because of the track : : So this refers to the object I'm constructing because I'm in the constructor. It's a pointer to the object I'm constructing. When we're inside of the constructor for a Python function, self is the object itself.
Oh, okay, I see this. So they're using the pointer instead of the dot.
Yes.
Okay.
And they're using this instead of self.
Okay.
Whereas in Python, if you're in my class, I would have told you self is conventional. Everybody uses it, but it's not required. You put a different word there. This is required. That's the word.
Oh,
Okay, because it's not passed in as a parameter, it's built into the language. So don't use this as a variable name. It already is there as a special meaning. You'll notice it's highlighted in exactly the same way that self is highlighted in my Python code. So from a developer's perspective, it's the same thing. Okay. More questions about this? All right, we actually want to make sure that we copy the title into our data member for M title, right? How do we copy strings? We didn't actually use string length and string copy, did we? We kind of made our own?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a set of C libraries for dealing with C strings. And if we include the header file associated with it, ignore the man behind the curtain for just a second. Destination source, yes. Just want to make sure I had the order of the parameters right. Okay, 2 lines of code, a little bit of syntax to talk about, right? First thing is, there is actually a header file, string.h, that you can use when you're in C programs to do a lot of string manipulation. But when you're in C++ and you want to use a C library, you actually drop the .h and you add a C in front. So we used math before, right? If we were to use math again when we're in a C++ program, you actually say C math rather than math.h. Like that. They had to make it different. I'm not sure why they felt they had to make it different, but they had to make it different. Okay, so that's the include piece. Now, string copy is a function, a library function defined inside a C string that makes our life easier in that it knows that C strings are null terminated, and it can copy from one null terminated string into another space and make that next space have an identical copy, including the terminating null character. So it copies strings from one place to another. Just character copy. And so we call string copy. We give it the address of an array where we want the copy to be stored, and the address of an array where the original is. So this is the source and this is the destination. So mtitle is an array of 128 characters, right? So we can copy titles up to 127 characters long, safely. And finally, this std : string copy is a part of the standard library. And so when we want to access part of the standard library, we actually are using what is called a namespace here, namespace qualifier, std : We're going to talk a lot about namespaces in another day, but for now, whenever you include a standard library header file, anything in the angle brackets there, you're probably going to have std : in front of some code to say that it's located over there.
So how do you know that it's in the standard library?
The easiest way to know is by looking at documentation. So, for example, over here, string copy comes from C string, so here's the header I would use to include it. And then they give you some sample C code as opposed to C++ code. Thank you very much.
Well, you know, they got to make your job a little bit harder.
They made mine harder.
Basically, if I leave that off when I compile, I'm going to get an error saying that string copy is not defined. But if I put that in, it will be defined. Think of in Python when we import a module, and you have to give the module name dot and then whatever's inside that module, whether it's a class name or a function or a variable. Well, this std : is basically the same kind of thing. It's just you're not using the header file's name, you're using std. Because everything's in the standard namespace when you include all the system stuff. Okay, get length. Now, given what we know about the way C++ classes work and what get length is supposed to do, what should I write here?
Return this and not length.
Nothing. What goes here?
Yeah.
Error.
Okay, so we're grabbing the mlength data member off of the current object, the object of type track that we're dealing with. Is it still mystical? Let's implement setLength. Let me recall the Python version of setLength. I want to follow a similar structure, right?
Would
Yes.
you ever see like asterisk this in parentheses dot in length?
Would you see it? You could see it. I mean, that's just as valid as far as syntax goes. That's compiler actually in the end treats those two lines the same. The thing is, this is easier to type than this, which is why I suspect that this arrow syntax was created in the first place. So I don't see this very often in real code.
Okay.
Should I leave that in there as a comment?
Sure.
Does that help or hinder understanding? Okay, set length. What do I want to say?
Well, do we still have to do the test?
Yeah, let's still do the test. Yeah.
Okay, so if same name, length in, greater than or equal to 0. This arrow mlength equals length in. And return true lowercase. return false? You don't have to do the else then, right?
Well, logically, we don't have to, because the return will never allow us to get to this code if we're inside the if statement.
Okay.
It's logically the same. We could put the else.
So we have that test in the header and in the implementation?
We don't have it in the header.
Oh,
This over here is our Python implementation.
right.
Our header file is right here.
Okay.
So all the header file really does is declare to the rest of the world what methods that they can use out of this class. Okay, get title.
So return arrow,
This arrow.
or this arrow, sorry. Get title, or end title, yeah.
Okay. And sets title.
If
We want to say if the title is valid here, right?
right,
Okay, let's leave that blank for a minute. If the title is valid, what do we do?
then this arrow.
Okay.
Equal former title then?
Okay, what's wrong with that? So from a memory perspective, we've got this pointer that's pointing off to our object, right? We've got within there the m length data member, which has enough space for a double, and we've also got m title, which has enough space for 127 characters plus the null character, right? We've also got title in, which is a pointer to somewhere in memory where we've got a null terminated string of the title, right? If we say this m title equals title in, we're actually taking this pointer and trying to put this pointer right up here, as opposed to copying the contents of this memory into the content into this location, which is what we wanted, right? Okay, how do we do that in the constructor? How do we copy the contents of a string?
What do we want to do, the string copy then?
Yes. Like that. So does the reasoning behind that make sense?
Could you go over it again?
Okay. If I say this arrow m title equals title in, then I'm actually talking about pointers here. I'm trying to copy this pointer to this pointer. So I'm trying to take this pointer and actually overwrite the location m title points to. And so that's not what we want to do.
Right.
We want a copy of this string stored up here in this area. And that's why we're going to use the string copy.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, if we're successful then, we should return a true, and if we're not successful, return a false. So we have to worry about this, but questions about the other part?
Well, so why are we doing this as a Boolean instead of, just
You're doing it or not doing it?
yeah.
This is somewhat as a personal preference, but when I'm writing functions that are doing manipulations, I would like the code that calls these to know whether they were successful or not. So that if my wrapping code could then deal with problems. Because I don't have any user interface in here, and I don't want any user interface in here. But if there is a problem, I want to be able to alert the user or the external system that there's a problem. So I generally have my set methods return a bool. And sometimes they always just return true because there is no wrong value. But I usually do it anyway. Okay, what is the error condition? When would we not want to copy the string?
When it doesn't exist?
Okay, let's see. Okay, it wouldn't exist if title in were a bad pointer.
Well,
I'm going to assume that they've actually passed me a valid pointer. What kind of contents are bad?
What if it didn't have a null terminator? Or terminum null?
Right, and we don't know whether it has a null terminator or not, but we can count how long it takes to find a null terminated character, right? So we can actually look at the length of a string.
Okay.
So let's go a little bit more generic than if there isn't one. Let's say that it's very long.
If it's less than 128?
Okay. If the length is more than the length we have to store here, then we're in trouble, right? We're going to overwrite the boundary of this array.
Yeah.
That's our main concern here. So if the length of the input string is not too long, then we're okay. So how do we find the length of the input string? We actually wrote a string length function, right? Well, I was just copying the standard library. There's one in the standard library called string length, strlen. It takes a character pointer and it counts how many characters there are up to but not including the first null character. Okay, so this will tell us how many characters there are, not including the null character. So if that's less than
128?
128, we should be fine, right? If it's 127, then we'll copy 127 real characters, and then string copy will put a null character at the end. We'll actually use up 128 characters of space, which is the size of mtitle, right? It's 128 total. Okay, I'm going to write my code a little bit more defensively. Since mtitle is an array, the size of operator will actually tell me how big the array is. And now if I happen to change its size back in my header file, this code doesn't have to be updated.
I used size of in my code, and I'm a little weary because of all the debugging I had to do. But you're saying that's going to be the more foolproof way of doing it.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, now knowing what we know about string copy and its potential errors, I'm going to go back up to my constructor and make sure that I don't cause any memory errors in my constructor, along with, if the value they give us isn't correct, we need title to store something, right? So if they give us a string that's too long, up here in the constructor, I'm just going to go ahead and copy some default string into the title that isn't too long. Actually, it is too long. Anyway, the reason for this is my constructor doesn't have a return value. Constructors don't return anything, so I can't communicate back from the constructor. So I kind of have to handle errors the best I can when I'm inside my constructor. All right, questions? We've implemented a small class. We haven't tested it, so we have no idea if it works yet or not. to yet another file then. This is going to be my tester code. It's going to create a new track. The new track will be, I should have done some research here. That's its name. We know how long it is?
There you go, it's 10 minutes.
It must only be part of the song then.
I think there's different versions of it with various lengths. Now there's one that's really humongously long.
We're going to do the 1705, the standard album version. 17 minutes and 5 seconds. That's 17 times 60 plus 5, right? And we're actually going to capture this name because I think that's more accurate. Okay. So that supposedly constructs everything, right? Now, if we wanted to test it, we could use our accessor methods in order to actually pull those values back out and see if they come back out. So, if I were going to display output, I would do something like this. Length is a float, right? And so I can say t dot get length. And the title is a string. Let's see. I'm using standard I/O now, right? Which again, we're in a C++ program using a C header file, so we say C standard I/O. Oh, that also means that printf is in the standard namespace.
What does C++ use instead of printf?
It uses cout, and we're going to do that. I just thought I'd better not throw it in at the last 2 minutes of class when we're already introduced a whole bunch of new things. But that would be the way we would do it. Okay, so finally, I better make a makefile and build and run this, right? So let me increase my buffer size real quick. Okay, so track main. Now, how many CPP files do we have? We've got track main.cpp and we've got track.cpp, right? So both of those files are necessary in order to be able to build my output executable. That's the cheapest I can do here.
And what do I use on Mac for a makefile? Like GCC or something?
G++ and GCC exist on a Mac. If you're using Xcode, it can be taught to do C++ code.
Oh, can it?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So notice that instead of saying GCC, I say G++. That's the only difference here in compiling. And G++, the compiler itself will actually compile C code, but we're doing C++ now. Okay, so again, it had to actually compile the implementation file for my class, and it had to compile the main, and then they had to be linked together right here in order to create my executable. So the code from both of those CPP files came together. run it, I get out the data that I expected. Alright? At least I think that's 17 minutes and 5 seconds.
Sure.
Okay. I still didn't execute in track main. I haven't executed the set methods. So let me just do that. I want to set length. Oh. The single was only 2 minutes and 52 seconds. What was it? 2 T dot set title. If you've never listened to that song, you probably should.
I probably haven't listened to the full version.
I probably only heard a small version of it too.
Okay, so hopefully at least that gives you a sample of getting started with C++ classes.
Right on.
If you hack it to the student